Hi, I'm William. Thank you very much for clicking on the video, and this is my case study for the project I've been working on for the last half of the year, and it's called Edvice. Edvice is the app that people go to when they're curious and don't have anyone to answer their questions in their own personal network, so they come to this app instead, and they pay someone for their time to answer their questions or give them the advice they need. The problem statement is users need a way to quickly get in contact with an expert because they need advice on the topics that interest them. And it's followed by the overview, which gives a description of some of the tools I use, such as Figma and Optimal Workshop. It also gives answers to the 5 questions that I ask at the beginning of every project, which are who, what, when, where, and why. And it's my job to come up with the how. Next is a description of my process, which has 4 phases to it, called discover, define, develop, and deliver, and they each have their own sub-phases. I began with the discover phase, doing competitive analysis. I chose to look at LinkedIn, Upwork, and Fiverr because they are professional websites that are also freelancing, and so it's the perfect intersection of what Edvice is all about. After the competitive analysis phase, I moved on to user research, which consisted of 3 30-minute interviews with different people in different stages of life. I made sure to ask them a bunch of questions about how they look for questions and advice, look for answers and advice on the things that they need help with. And some common themes between them were that they all like to see body language and tone of voice. It really helps them towards gaining an understanding for the things they need help with. Another thing I learned was that they get really frustrated and dissatisfied when Google can't answer their really specific questions, which individuals might be able to. I took the information from my user interviews. I made sure to analyze it all, and I came up with 3 very distinct personas. The third one is on the next page, but these 2 are Hannah and George. Hannah is fresh out of school and in her first career job for the first time, and George has been at it for about 10 years, but he's actually starting his new business and has a kid on the way, so that combination leads to some very interesting use cases. The third persona is actually a proto-persona because I wasn't able to gain as much information about people who answer questions online as I wanted to out of my user interviews, so I had to research that on my own, just on the internet. And I learned that a lot of people feel pride in themselves and in their knowledge when they answer questions online, and so that was a very, very helpful insight when it came to emotional design later on in the project. Then I moved on to journey maps and user flows. I made sure to use emojis when creating the journey maps because it's really easy to tell what emotion an emoji is experiencing at a time as part of the name. It goes a much longer way than just saying the name or typing the name of the emotion. I made sure to give each persona a very realistic use case for why they would go to Edvice, and so that helped me create a detailed user flow for each of the 3 of them. Finally, in the define phase of the project, I created a sitemap and ran it through a card sorting exercise with a bunch of individuals, and I got some very, very helpful information, which you can see on the right, which helped me edit my sitemap to a much more digestible version. Next, I moved on to the develop phase, and it began with low-fidelity wireframes done on grid paper with marker and post-it notes. The post-it notes were actually incredibly helpful because they provided modularity to the process, which really increased the wireframing speed. Next, I made my first wireframes on Figma, just using a bunch of gray blocks, gray lines, just very quick stuff. Then I moved on to high fidelity wireframes, still in black and white, but I made sure to use lots of text and images this time around to give it a more realistic feel. These are also the wireframes that I used for my first prototype for my usability tests. Here are the final high fidelity prototype designs. They are shorter than the previous designs, and that's because the previous ones I found out during usability testing were too tall. for user devices, and so I had to start from a smaller frame size. So I had went and redid everything to fit on this smaller frame, which really ended up benefiting me in the long run because now my prototype is more accessible to more devices. After the wireframing and early prototyping, I moved on to usability tests. I actually completed 6 usability tests, 2 in person and 4 were remote. In these usability tests, I had 4 different background questions and 6 different tasks for users to complete. And I actually had a few different problems on wording for these questions. For example, on a couple of the tasks, the user case that I gave or the scenarios were just a little bit too weird or a little too uncomfortable, and it led to users or my participants getting the wrong idea about a few things and going in the unintended directions. So I ended up asking them more appropriate questions after they got it wrong once or twice to nudge them in the right direction. After analyzing all the data from the usability tests, I created an affinity map full of observations, positive quotes, negative quotes, and errors. And as you can see on the right, there were some errors that were repeated, such as many instances of users unable to return to the home screen due to poor back button prototyping. So that was the first error that I tackled first because it was the one that appeared the most and was the most severe to the most people. After the usability tests, I went and did a peer review with my peers on Slack, and they provided some very, very helpful insights which might not have been noticed by people who aren't looking out for these things. For example, on the left side of the screen, on the before side, it shows 2 different pages. However, they look entirely the same, and they're part of the same user flow. And so my peers were pretty confused when they reached the second one, thinking that they had already done this before, and it was confusing and a little frustrating. The new version of this flow has users do it the first time, and then it asks them in very clear wording, do you want to help users find you by adding topics of expertise, which is slightly different from the version of this they completed originally. And there's a very clear way to skip this if they're not interested. So now it's very clear that it's something else. Here's another spot on the homepage actually. My peers wanted a place to see their bookmarks, and they wanted a place to see additional information on an upcoming video call, so I made sure to include those 2 things for them. Finally, on the Explore flow, my peers explained that they felt it was too long, that they felt ready to see their results immediately, but they had to click through too many screens to get there. They also felt that the tap to explore part in the top left of the before photo should lead them to a text box or a page that had a text box. And so it was very confusing for them to reach that second page in the before section, which doesn't have a text box. So I made sure to edit that first page of the Explore flow to contain everything that my users need. After my peer review, I created a design language system in the format of a website using Figma. This design language system describes all the decisions and choices that I made, all the patterns that I created while creating Edvice, including all the decisions behind color, typography, iconography, etc. This design language system really helped me get all of my thoughts together in one place to really help any future project workers who would be working on Edvice. It really, really helped me think about what I have to do to communicate my design choices. And I find that it was maybe the most rewarding part of the project. Finally, in completing Edvice, I learned a few things about myself. First, I had never learned anything about visual design or emotional design before working on this project. And so I went from those gray boxes and gray lines in my first Figma prototype to what you see on this page, and I'm just very, very proud of what I was able to accomplish in this time frame. For the future, I really want to grow in my interviewing skills. As I mentioned before, I didn't get enough information to create 3 full personas that I wanted to, so I needed to perform additional research. I also had a few wording problems during my usability tests that I had to correct on the spot. And so I think that with the correct development in my interviewing skills, I'll be able to fix these for the future. Thank you for listening to my brief explanation of my case study on Edvice. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please make sure to leave a comment below. Thank you.